If the classic image of Russia is of an icy country where the majority are strong, stern men, you can erase that idea from your head. Indeed they are, but as contradictory as it may seem, women are in the majority there. What's more, they are in all areas of Russian life, from heavy industry to the luxury market, from scientific laboratories to behind-the-scenes politics. Even so, they face enormous challenges. Behind the veneer of modernity, there is still a conservative and sexist structure that puts these women to the test every day. And it's exactly this little talked-about reality that we're going to talk about now. Today, Bello Mundo shows you what it's really like to be a woman in Russia. When someone thinks of a Russian woman, what usually comes to mind is a stereotype. Young, blonde, tall, elegant, perhaps wearing high heels in the middle of winter. But this image is far from reflecting the reality of those born and raised in the largest country on the planet. The truth is that, behind this constructed appearance, there is a much more complex universe, full of contrasts, inequalities, and also resistance. In Russia, being a woman can mean many things at once, and it all depends on where you live, which generation you belong to, what religion you follow, what kind of family you had, and even how many degrees below zero it is outside. Here, diversity isn't just about the landscape. It's social, cultural, and deeply human. Number 1. Stereotypes that no longer stick. The most exported image of Russian women is always the same: beautiful, seductive, super feminine, and supposedly looking for a rich foreigner to marry. But this idea no longer sticks. Although it still circulates in the West, fueled by films, social networks, and even dating sites, it is far removed from the daily lives of most Russian women. In real life, these women are much closer to the daily hustle and bustle than to any catwalk. They work, study, face the cold, queues, crowded transport, look after the house and often other people too. There are solo mothers, those who share a salary with their elderly parents, and those who live in villages where time seems to have never passed. In Moscow, for example, it's common to find women driving imported cars, speaking 2 or 3 languages, leading companies. In more isolated regions of Siberia or the Muslim Caucasus, the picture changes. Simple houses, large families, and a structure where marrying early and looking after the home is still the norm. There are also the indigenous women of the far north, who live in extreme temperatures and maintain very different customs from the rest of the country. And there are those who live in regions with a strong military presence, where you can still feel the legacy of the Cold War. Of course, there are those who fit that magazine stereotype of Russian women, but that doesn't represent the diversity of the country at all. There, you'll see women wearing ripped jeans, orthodox veils, high heels in the snow, or military uniforms, and all of them are as Russian as any magazine cover. Number 2. More women than men. As we said at the beginning of the video, Russia is one of the few countries in the world with far more women than men. The latest figures show that women make up around 54% of the population, while men make up just 46%. And this is nothing new under the circumstances. Since the 19th century, censuses have pointed out this difference, which has only increased over time. The explanation: extremely low male life expectancy, alcohol abuse, smoking, untreated illnesses, accidents, and suicides directly affect men's health. And as a result, many die before the age of 55. Women, on average, live to over 75, not to mention the history of wars, guerrillas, and conflicts throughout history. But being in the majority doesn't mean having power. It doesn't translate into equality in the job market, political participation, or security. In many families, too, the shortage of men creates enormous pressure for women to seize the opportunity and marry quickly. And with that comes problems. Number 3. Domestic violence released by law. In Russia, it's common to see men offering flowers on a first date, opening doors and paying for dinner. Classic signs of chivalry. But the same man who hands out roses on Women's Day may think it's normal for his wife not to work, to look after the house on her own, or to accept aggression as part of the marriage. Yes, it's shocking. But since 2017, beating your wife without breaking bones or leaving deep scars is not considered a crime in Russia. All the aggressor has to do is pay a fine, which in many cases comes out of the family's own account. And that's it. If he hits again in less than a year, then there could be more serious punishment. But the road to this formal complaint is long, painful, and full of trials. The most bizarre thing: the law was supported by female MPs and justified as a way of protecting traditional family values. In other words, the victim becomes guilty, and the aggressor remains completely free. Russian society is so marked by this conservative thinking that expressions such as "beat because you love," "beat because you deserve it," are still common and encouraged by the church. Number 4. Religion. The Orthodox Church plays a central role in what it means to be a woman in Russia. For religious leaders, feminism is seen as a threat, and the ideal woman is one who takes care of the home, husband, and children, always with discretion, silence, and obedience. The patriarch of the church went so far as to say that if women give up their role of looking after the home, everything is destroyed: the family, the country, and civilization. This kind of discourse doesn't just happen in the sermons at Mass, it happens in the halls of government, in schools, and within families. As a result, many people still believe that a woman who is beaten has provoked it, or that if she reacts, she is being too rebellious. And it gets much worse. Number 5. The primer for putting up with a war husband. As if all that wasn't enough, the war in Ukraine has brought back to Russia images that seem to have been left over from the last century. Young men being rushed into service, soldiers returning with deep traumas, and families torn apart by the effects of a conflict that has been going on for years. But what was most shocking was the way in which the government decided to deal with this impact on the home front. Instead of offering psychological support to veterans or creating public policies to help them, a wing of the government launched something no one expected: a booklet aimed at soldiers' wives, advising them on how they should behave towards a traumatized husband returning from war. The content? A veritable manual of submission. The text, published by a Kremlin-linked organization called the Russian Popular Front, recommends that women empathize with their husbands, even if they become aggressive or display violent or abusive behavior. The booklet advises women not to criticize their husbands or complain about mood swings, aggressive sexual impulses, or rude attitudes. On the contrary, according to the document, it is up to the wife to understand the warrior's emotional state and help him return to normal. In practice, this means putting all the responsibility for the husband's emotional reintegration on his wife's shoulders, without offering her any structure to deal with it. The state outsources the trauma of war to the domestic environment and naturalizes violence as part of the process, as if it were just a detail to be borne with patience. The context behind this primer is even more disturbing. With the high death rate at the front, the Russian government began to recruit even convicted sex offenders to fight in the war in exchange for their freedom. Many of these men returned home after months of combat, with no psychological support, no filters, and, in some cases, a history of aggression. And now they are being taken in by women who have been instructed to put up with everything quietly in the name of domestic stability. For human rights activists, the message of the booklet is clear. Russian women must pay the emotional price of war. While the soldiers are seen as heroes, they are placed as silent caretakers with no space to protect themselves, denounce, or even question the abuses. It's a cruel portrait of how the government treats women, as an emotional shield to protect the image of the state, even if it costs the mental and physical health of these women. And anyone who thinks that this has generated general indignation is mistaken. Part of society saw the booklet as something normal and even useful. The logic is clear. The man's suffering is legitimized. Women's suffering is silenced. Number 6. The shame of reporting. Many victims simply don't report their aggressors, and when they do, they aren't taken seriously. Cases of concussion, bruising, or psychological aggression end up being treated as a family matter, with police saying that dirty laundry is washed at home. And when the woman decides to defend herself, the risk of imprisonment falls on her. That's right. Around 80% of Russian women who react to attacks end up in prison for trying to defend themselves. The logic is completely reversed. The few who manage to escape go to shelters, many run by NGOs and churches. But even these places are under threat. There are cases of women who have died at the hands of their husbands after being located in shelters, and also those who have been forced to return home. However, the scenario is changing, as you'll see below. Number 7. The relationship crisis. Even with this population imbalance and aggressive patriarchal history, more and more Russian women are giving up on marriage. And the reason, as you can already see, is the lack of decent options. The image of the strong, protective Russian man is becoming outdated, and many have realized that it's not worth insisting. The result is noticeable. Moscow, for example, has more than 3 million single women between the ages of 25 and 50, and many of them are doing just fine. Others prefer to have relationships with foreigners, which only adds to the myth that Russian women are easy or self-interested, a completely distorted view of reality. Basically, what is happening is a silent shift. They no longer want to repeat the old model of the submissive woman. And that's bothering a lot of people. As many of them are increasingly educated and independent, the gap between what they want and what the Russian man offers is only growing. The result? A growing wave of disappointments, frustrations, and women who choose to be alone by choice, not for lack of suitors. Number 8. Women who have become their own bosses. Faced with such a hostile environment, many women have decided to take charge of their own lives. Russia is one of the countries with the highest number of female entrepreneurs in the world. They lead small businesses, run companies, go to university, look after the home, and still find time to fight for their rights. Around 45% of leadership positions are held by women, a high figure, especially when compared to much more developed countries. But this independence comes at a price. Many are seen as too feminine, bossy, or masculinized by their own co-workers. Number 9. Lower salaries and forbidden professions. Even with all this prominence, the pay gap remains glaring. On average, women earn 30% less than men. And the most absurd thing, Russian legislation officially prohibits women from working in more than 400 professions on the grounds that they are dangerous or harmful to reproductive health. Do you want to be a bus driver, a scuba diver, ship captain? Forget it. Even if she has a diploma, A woman can be barred from practicing her profession just because she is a woman. In one famous case, a female candidate was prevented from working on ships, and even though she won in court, she was unable to be hired. Worse still, high-level political positions are practically a ball club. Only 16% of parliament is made up of women, and none have ever reached the top of power. Number 10. The weight of appearance. In Russia, women's appearance is not just a matter of personal taste. It is deeply linked to social status, cultural expectations, and even professional survival. Being beautiful, slim, and well-dressed is still seen, in many situations, as a silent obligation, especially in big cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, where aesthetic competition is visible even on the streets. This has historical and economic roots. During the Soviet era, clothes were standardized, cosmetics were scarce, and there was no incentive for individual consumption. When the regime fell, a wave of Western influence swept in, bringing fashion magazines, beauty salons, and an avalanche of aesthetic standards that came to be seen as a symbol of modernity and success. Today, looking good is almost a prerequisite for being taken seriously in many spaces, especially in the service sector, in the media, in aviation, and even in administrative areas. Many women report that if they are not wearing makeup, high heels, or impeccable hair, they are seen as sloppy or unfeminine. And this isn't just opinion. There are companies that actually place aesthetic criteria on job vacancies, and companies that demote older employees or those who don't meet the visual standard. One emblematic case was that of the airline Aeroflot, which restricted international flights to flight attendants who wore sizes above 48 or were over 40. The justification: that the company's image standards should be preserved. The reaction came in the form of protests and the famous Old Fat Ugly movement, created by female employees who denounced the discrimination. They won in court. But the market's message was already given. Appearance matters, and a lot. What's more, investment in aesthetics consumes a significant part of women's income. The market for cosmetics, plastic surgery, and aesthetic procedures is growing every year. It's common to see women getting lip fillers, Botox, and plastic surgery at a young age as a way of securing a better position in relationships or careers. The so-called beauty economy has become a reality, and those outside this game are often simply not seen. And this is where the stereotype we talked about at the beginning came from. Despite all this, Russian women continue to resist. They are the ones leading movements for reproductive rights. They are the ones who run shelters, often underground. They are the ones who take the decision to live alone or raise children without a partner, even under the weight of judgment. And it was precisely they who led the workers' revolt that gave rise to International Women's Day, back on March 8, 1917. Since then, the country has alternated between advances and setbacks, but even under censorship, new women's voices continue to emerge. The big question is, how long will the state, society, and religion try to push these women back into silence? Because if there's one thing they've already made clear, it's that they won't accept this role quietly. And perhaps that is the greatest strength of Russian women. And that's it for today. But now we want to know, which part of this story surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments. Share the video with anyone who still thinks they know everything about Russia. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next destinations in our Bello Mundo. See you next time.